and welcome to another West Howe Community Enterprises cooking video. This week we're going to make spaghetti bolognese. It's been really good to see all the comments from people who've made the other recipes and how much you've enjoyed them, so I hope that you'll enjoy this one too. Just a quick overview of the things that you're going to need. Obviously the details are in the comments below. So you're going to need 500 grams of mince, whether that's minced beef, or if you're vegetarian like me, a minced vegetarian product will be absolutely fine. You'll need tomato puree and stock, some oil for your cooking. We've got garlic, which this is pre-chopped, but you can chop your garlic, salt and pepper, and some dried mixed herbs. We've got a couple of tins of chopped tomatoes, and then we've got 2 medium-sized onions, a couple of carrots and some celery, and we're going to put all this together and make a lovely spaghetti bolognese, and then I will cook up the pasta ready to eat it as I go. So let's get started. To begin with, we need our large pan, and we're going to put a low heat on that and about 2 tablespoons of oil. Essentially you want a drizzle of oil to coat the bottom of the pan, just so that nothing sticks. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that to warm up, and whilst that's happening, we need to chop all of this nice and small. So onions, we're taking off the outside. We're going to give the celery a scrub because we don't peel that, and we're going to peel the carrots. So I'll just get on and do those. I find the best thing with spaghetti bolognese is to chop all of this really small, because then you get the really good texture with the sauce mixing with the pasta. You don't get lumps of vegetables, but you still get the flavour and you still get the goodness. Oh, try not to throw that on the floor. So I'm going to chop them up as small as I can manage. Ends. So I'm just doing the little discs, and then I might chop them in half. This is going to take a few minutes, so I'm going to put you on pause while I do it, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got some nice carrot chopped up really small, and I've given the celery a wash. I'm just going to chop off the very end bits and discard those because they tend to be a little bit dry. And you can use more celery, it's really down to preference. This stick was quite big, so I'm just using one, but you can put in a couple. There's going to be enough sauce to be able to absorb. If there's little stringy bits like that, just pull those off. And again, we just want this to be fairly small. Some people miss out the celery, but it's amazing what a difference it does make to the flavour, even though you don't think that you would notice it because it's so mild. This is definitely a dish where you want a little bit of celery. And trust me, if it's not a vegetable that you would normally eat on its own, it's not going to stand out hugely. So do try it. I promise you will be glad that you put it in there. All the flavours combined go really well. Going to give the oil a stir. So it's on a low heat, so it's warm now. but it's not burning. We don't want that burning on the bottom of the pan while we're doing this. But it'll be nice and hot, ready for things to go in a moment. Okay, so that's the celery, and then we just have our onions. So they're kind of like a medium-sized onion. You could use a different colour onion if you want to use red, or if you have some shallots, you could use those too, whatever you've got available. Just some nice fresh onions. So as always, we're just taking out the outside layers. So they tend to be a little bit chewy, depending on how fresh the onion is, really. Oops, it's sticking to my fingers. And we're going to just chop this up to a similar size, really, as the carrot and the celery, so that everything's about the same size. That way it cooks at an equal rate as well. So in this spag bol, we don't really want things to be crunchy. We want them to have cooked down nice and soft, which is why we are putting the vegetables in before the mince. So I'm just cutting this lengthways and then across. There are many ways to cut an onion which are probably a lot more effective than my method, but this is just the one that I found that works. I'm going to put you on pause while I do this one, and then we'll chuck that in the pan. Okay, so we have a lovely bowl of vegetables here. I'm going to pop those into the pan. Great sizzling noise, so you know the oil's hot. And you want to give that a bit of a stir, and we're going to cook that for a couple of minutes, probably just maybe five minutes or so, just until we can see that starts to soften. I will let you know how long it takes. Part of that, as I say in past videos, the time it takes for things to cook will sometimes depend on the pan that you've got and how thick the bottom is and how hot you've got the heat on. So we've got that started off, ready to cook through. We're going to pop a spoon of garlic in here too. You can use more garlic if you really love a garlicky flavour. I've suggested a teaspoon, so I think a teaspoon is kind of the minimum to be able to appreciate it. And I'm going to put in an extra one because I really like the garlicky flavour and it's really good for you. I'm going to give that a stir. Okay, that's brilliant. Okay, so that's going to do its thing for a while. The next thing that we're going to do is to add the mince once that's been cooking. So I've got my mince ready, but you might want to just break up your mince now if it's kind of in a block where it's been in the fridge. So just break that up, take the paper off the bottom of it if there is paper there, so that that's ready to go in. And then after that we'll be adding our tomatoes. So again, maybe get the tins open ready. I'm going to set the oven timer to remind me to come back and look at that in about 5 minutes time, and to just check that that's started to soften. So I will see you in 5 minutes. Okay, so our pan's been going for 5 minutes now, and I can smell that it's cooking through. I don't know that you'll be able to tell the difference, but the onion is slightly glazed over and changed colour there. So it's definitely starting to cook, but I'm going to give it another 5 minutes just to let the carrots soften a little bit. So I'm going to set the timer again, and I will be back with you in 5 minutes. Okay, so the timer is going off. That means this has been cooking for a total of 10 minutes now. So the colours have just faded from where they were to start with, and there's a lovely smell coming from the pan. Everything's got soft, so I know that that's cooked enough. So we're going to pop the mince in now, and because I've put it into this bowl, I'm probably going to spill it everywhere. The pan's looking pretty full now, but everything's going to shrink down as it starts to cook, so don't worry about that. Okay, so we need to give that a stir, and then we really want to cook that for about 3 or 4 minutes, or until it's brown, which will depend on what mince you're using. Give that a stir. Yeah, just it's going to depend a little bit on the mince that you're using. Just make sure that you keep it moving so that it doesn't get burnt on the bottom, because that's the last thing you want. There should be enough liquid in there with the oil that you put in to start with, and then the liquid from the mince and the vegetables. But if it's feeling really, really dry, you can always add a little bit more of the oil. So that's nicely mixed in. Yeah, so we're going to leave that for about 4 minutes, or until your mince is browned. And then we've got our other ingredients all kind of racked up here, ready to go. We're going to do the stock cube trick again. So as well as the 2 tins of tomatoes, we're going to pop in a stock cube just for a bit of extra flavour. So once I've emptied the tomatoes, I'm going to put in just half a tin of water, boiling water, to melt the stock cube. I'm using a vegetable stock cube, but you can use chicken or beef or whatever you've got lying around. It just adds an extra layer of flavour to the sauce as it's cooking. And we've got tomato puree. The recipe suggests that you use 2 tablespoons of tomato puree. If, like me, you don't have tablespoons, you just have a normal dessert spoon, it will be 3 of the dessert spoons that we'll put in there. So I'm going to just give this a bit more of a stir, and then I'm going to let that cook for 4 minutes, and then come back to you to add the rest of the ingredients. Okay, so 4 minutes later, this is looking fantastic. It's shrunk down a little bit, and we've got all those nice smells coming through. So it's time to add our tin tomatoes. We've got 2 tins of chopped tomatoes. There we go. And another one. Encourage that to come out a bit more. Okay. And very carefully stirring that, because I don't want it to all end up on the top of the hob. Okay. And I'm going to put in a teaspoon of dried mixed herbs. So as I usually say, most herbs will work well with this kind of recipe. Basil's particularly good. If you happen to have any fresh herbs, that will be even more delicious, but the dried mixed ones that I'm using are absolutely fine to bring out the flavours in this. About a teaspoon to 1.5 teaspoons for this. Give it a bit of a sprinkle and stir that round. And the tomato puree. So as I said, I'm using a dessert spoon, so I'm doing 3. It's quite difficult to measure. It's always going to be an approximation with tomato puree. You can't really put too much in there. The reason we use it is just that it adds a depth of tomato flavour, because it's so concentrated. So it's just going to make the sauce that bit richer. Okay. And then for our stock cube, I'm going to boil the kettle and just add about half a can of water with the stock cube. So just really enough to melt it down. That went everywhere except in the can. I'm going to boil the kettle with the camera off, because it's incredibly loud, and then we'll just mix that up in here. Okay, so I usually mix the stock cube with a fork, because I find it breaks it up better, and I find a little bit of hot water first to melt it and sort of squish it against the edges. We really don't want lumps of stock in our food. This is also a good way to just get the last bit of tomato out of the tin. and it's one less thing to wash up. So about a third to half a tin. And that goes in as well. Okay, it's starting to really smell like spaghetti bolognese now. So if you've got anything like me, your pan is now pretty full and it makes it quite difficult to stir it, but that's okay because this is all going to just start to mix together and thicken up as it's cooking. I'm going to turn the heat up because we have more in here to heat through now. Okay, and I'm going to put the lid on now, and we're just going to leave that in there to cook. Whilst that's doing its thing, we need to make sure that we've got our pasta ready. So I'll just grab that. Okay, so I'm using spaghetti. You don't have to use spaghetti for spaghetti bolognese. Any pasta will taste good with this. You also, if you don't like pasta, you might want to use the sauce with a nice chunk of freshly baked bread or with potatoes. It goes with a jacket potato really nicely, or even just on its own. So whatever you fancy doing. I'm going to have mine with spaghetti tonight. The suggestion is usually 75 grams of spaghetti or pasta per adult, and it's sometimes difficult to measure that. It's kind of a fistful. I've got quite a small fist. So I'm just going to cook enough for myself because you don't want to be reheating pasta. It doesn't do anything for the consistency. So I'm just going to cook this much. And you need to just follow the instructions on the packet. On the whole, it's going to be pretty much the same. Put some water in the pan, let that boil, and then add the pasta. Usually cook for about 10 minutes. So I'm going to just start that off so that the water is starting to boil. We want to cook our bolognese for about 20 minutes now. So I'm going to set a timer for that. Keep an eye on it. Don't let it burn on the bottom. So periodically you want to give that a stir. And meanwhile we can get our water up to the boil slowly in this pan here. And we'll also add a little bit of salt to it as well, just for added flavour. So I might put the last bit of that boiling water in there just to speed things up. Okay, lid on, heat on, and now we wait. So I will come back to you in a few minutes with an update. Hi, so the spaghetti bolognese sauce has been cooking for 10 minutes. I've stirred it once halfway through that. It wasn't stuck on the bottom of the pan because it's quite moist, but it just helps to mix the flavours in. So at the 10-minute mark, it's really smelling like spaghetti bolognese and it's starting to thicken up nicely. I'm going to leave that now without the lid on for the last bit of the cooking because that will just help it to thicken up and it means I can enjoy the smell. This is our water for the pasta, which is pretty much boiled now. It's just got the little simmering bubbles in there. So I usually cook my spaghetti for about 8 minutes. So I'm going to pop that in there in 2 minutes time, and then everything will have 8 minutes to finish off cooking. So it will all be done together. At this point, if you would like some grated cheese to put on top of your spaghetti bolognese, which I always do, now is a good time to grab your cheese grater and get your table laid, get everything ready to serve, because once the pasta is cooked, then you're going to be able to serve this straight away. And any spare that you've got left, you can keep in the fridge or the freezer. I'm going to put mine in a tub, in a couple of these tubs, and we'll need to let the bolognese cool for an hour or so before it goes into the fridge or freezer. So I've got that ready to go here, but I'm going to leave that for 2 more minutes before the pasta goes in, so I'll be right back. Okay, so the water is boiled and we have just about 8 minutes of cooking time left to go with the spaghetti bolognese. So now is a great time to put the pasta in the pan. If you're using spaghetti like me and your pan isn't quite as large as the spaghetti, you might need to dip it in, kind of push it round as it starts to get wet. It's also a good time to add a little bit of salt and pepper to the spaghetti bolognese, just for the last stages of cooking. So I'm just adding a little bit of salt, and I'm gonna add quite a lot of pepper because I love pepper, but just go with however much you think you would like. You can always taste it to check. Any excuse to taste it, just don't burn your tongue. That's thickening up really nicely. Okay, let's see if we can get this to go into the pan now without breaking it. Okay. Right, so we want to make sure that that water stays on the boil and keep an eye on the clock. About 8 to 10 minutes usually for the pasta, but you will be able to tell as it gets to the 8-minute mark. Just take a piece out and check the consistency. Make sure that it's cooked to your desired amount. And I've got my little bowl of Parmesan cheese to put on top when I serve it up. I will see you in 8 minutes. Okay, so 8 minutes later, we should have cooked pasta. I usually just fish out one of the strands of spaghetti, being very careful because it is hot, and just break it off, and you'll be able to tell if it breaks easily. Or you can do what I do and just eat some of it. That is cooked perfectly. You don't want it to be soft and mushy, but you don't want it to be hard. Oops, making a bit of a mess there. And the bolognese is smelling and looking delicious. Have had a taste and it tastes great too. So I'm going to drain pasta over the sink and get this all served up and show you the finished result. Okay, so here is my spaghetti bolognese with a little bit of Parmesan cheese on top. Feel free to add extra salt and pepper if you wish, and I hope you really enjoy it. The recipe, as I say, with the quantities is all in the comments below, and give us a subscribe if you fancy seeing videos in future. Enjoy your spaghetti bolognese. I know I'm going to enjoy mine, and I'll see you next week.